Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Show. I'm Martin Geisler. Coming up this morning, the First Minister live on the programme. John Swinney has been in office for a year and seems to have turned the SNP's fortunes around. But how different a party is the SNP now to the one he inherited? And with a year to go to the Holyrood elections, where's independence on his list of priorities? I'll ask him. There's a big vote in Holyrood this week as the assisted dying bill is debated in Parliament. Liam MacArthur, the Lib Dem MSP who brought it forward, will join me to discuss what is a profound and difficult decision that his parliamentary colleagues are being asked to make. All that to come between now and 10:30. After that, it is over to Andrew Black on the radio and BBC Sounds. Hi, Andrew.
Hi there, Martin. We're also looking at the issue of assisted dying. We're going to be speaking to a doctor who specialises in treating terminally ill patients, who says it's the wrong thing to do. Also coming up, the UK government has signed trade deals with the US and India. Keir Starmer says they're going to be game-changing for things like Scotch whisky and beef, but some industry leaders are not so sure. And the Scottish comedian Richard Gadd's controversial stalker drama, Baby Reindeer, is up for a load of awards at the BAFTAs tonight, and Kirsty Walker's also getting a special one in recognition of her contribution to television.
All that to come with Andrew at 10:30. Let's get on with the show. Yeah, plenty of conversation for you this morning. It's also going on online, on social media, of course. If you want to take part in that side of it, you can. The hashtag, as ever, BBC Sunday Show. Right then, a year from now, we will know who the next Scottish Government will be. Polls, at the moment, suggest the SNP have cause for some very genuine optimism. But a year is a long time, of course, and a lot can change. For evidence of that, you don't even need to look back a year, just to last July, when the SNP took an absolute panelling in the general election. John Swinney had just taken over the party at that point, so he couldn't really shoulder the blame. And in the months since, under his leadership, they seem to have made a significant recovery. Mr Swinney, of course, a different leader, and this is the first time he's asked the public to make him First Minister. So who is he and what's he offering? That's what we want to find out this morning. And I am very pleased to say the First Minister joins me now live from Perth. Good morning, First Minister.
Good morning, Martin.
Thanks very much indeed for being with us. Right, let's nail this first. Who's responsible for your recovery in the polls? Who gets the credit, you or Keir Starmer?
Obviously, I've given leadership to the Scottish National Party to deliver an improvement in their fortunes, and that's been about the contribution that I've made, but it's also been about the contribution that my party has made. People in the SNP, I think, looked into the abyss of our difficulties a year ago and resolved to come together, work together to strengthen the party, and that's what everybody has done. So we stand, so I think what I've contributed is I've enabled people to come together, and people in the SNP have responded positively to that invitation. And
you've done it largely by, is it fair to say, ditching a lot of the identity politics agenda, ditching some of the environmental policies that were not necessarily popular. It's a different party and a different policy platform now?
It's a party that's focused on the priorities of the people of Scotland, where the government's agenda is about eradicating child poverty, boosting the economy, about tackling the cost of living crisis, about making the journey to net zero, and about strengthening our National Health Service and our public services. So we're focusing very much on the priorities of the public, addressing those priorities and making sure that we deliver on people's expectations.
The problem here is, I suppose, that what's implicit in some of your answers is that the SNP has slightly lost its way, had gone down a policy path that wasn't taking the public with it. But you were in the room. You've been in the room throughout the SNP's time in power, right at the heart of decision-making. So your hand's been on all of this right through, hasn't it?
I'm very proud of what the SNP government has achieved, because we've put in place big reforms that are helping people in their lives today. People live in Scotland today with families having access to the best early learning and childcare offer that's available in the United Kingdom. Families are supported through in poverty because of the Scottish Child Payment, which has only come about because of what the SNP has delivered. And we've got a strengthening position in terms of economic opportunity within Scotland as a consequence of what the SNP has delivered. So there's a lot to be proud of, but I think every political party's got to make sure that it's constantly addressing the real concerns of people in Scotland, and I'm seized to the fact that families are struggling today in the cost of living crisis. It's why we took steps this week to reinforce the measures we take to support the cost of living difficulties that people face with the announcement on peak rail fare abolition. And it's also about the steps that we're taking to make sure our public services work for the people of Scotland, particularly our National Health Service.
Right, I don't want to get specifically into the programme for government agenda that you laid out, because you've been interviewed several times here on the BBC and elsewhere about that in the days since. But what I do want to ask you about, I mean, we're talking about the distinction between your policy platform, your style, and your predecessors. Nicola Sturgeon was in Parliament on Tuesday, just before you were about to take to your feet on that big set-piece speech. I don't think she was in the chamber. Certainly Anna Sarwar said she didn't come into the chamber, but she stood outside and held court with journalists on the issue of trans rights. Now, that got a lot of publicity. It took up perhaps a lot of the attention away from what you were saying. You will never admit to me on the programme this morning that you were furious about that, but with the greatest respect, I'm going to suggest that I think you probably were.
Not in the slightest. I was pleased to hear Nicola setting out her perspective, and I agree with her perspective that it's important that the rights of everybody in Scotland, and that includes trans people, are properly and fully respected, and that's indeed what the Supreme Court judgment said to us.
But it's not her perspective, it's the timing. She didn't need to be there. She could have done this at any moment, perhaps 2 weeks previously, when trans people actually could have done with a powerful voice like hers in their corner, and she chose to do it just before you got to your feet.
Well, I'm completely at ease with that. I'm perfectly happy with the timing and perfectly happy with what Nicola said, and of course it corresponds with what I said immediately after the Supreme Court judgment, which is that we've got to protect and defend the rights of everybody within Scotland. People are entitled, no matter who they are, to have their rights protected, and a government under my leadership, and indeed a government under Nicola Sturgeon's leadership, always operated on the approach that people's rights had to be protected. So I'm completely at ease with all of that.
Just before we leave this issue, actually, on the issue of gender matters, it's difficult territory, I know, but now we're here, gender-specific toilets back in Parliament, trans women not allowed to use women's toilets in Parliament. As of now, will that extend to all civil service buildings or government buildings in Scotland? It kind of has to, right, as of now, doesn't it?
We're obviously taking forward all of the steps that are necessary to review these issues and to make sure we've got the proper guidance in place. Some of this will have to wait until the Equalities and Human Rights Commission provide their final guidance on these issues, which won't be for some time to come. But we're engaging with the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, and we're also undertaking the internal review work that's required to make sure that we always live within the law, which is an absolutely solemn commitment that my government makes to the people of Scotland.
But if you've done it in Parliament, presumably you think the time is now, and that surely then has to spread out to all civil service buildings, doesn't it?
Well, I don't run the Parliament. Parliament takes its own decisions. They're independent decision makers from the government. And the government is looking at all of these questions and will come to our conclusions in an orderly fashion. We have internal work underway on that as we speak.
OK, I said I didn't want to get bogged down in what was in the programme for government speech. I'll tell you what wasn't in it, independence. You don't seem to mention that very much at all anymore. Why not?
Well, I think I had a pretty demanding week last week with a number of significant policy and public interventions, and on Wednesday I set out a speech which essentially marked 12 months to go to the election. And what I was doing there was essentially mapping out to people the arguments the SNP will put forward in the run-up to that election, and one of those central arguments will be about the opportunities of independence. We're now seeing a Labour government in Westminster, and people told us we didn't need independence, but to just get a Labour government and things would get better. Well, look at what the Labour government's doing. The first act was to take away winter fuel payments from pensioners in Scotland. Now, my government, the SNP government, has intervened to restore those payments using our devolved powers. But it's an illustration that it doesn't matter whether you've got a Tory government in Westminster or a Labour government in Westminster. Westminster doesn't work for Scotland, which is why we need independence. And some of the economic challenges that we face in Scotland today will be solved if we have independence.
So you're fighting that you'll fight this next year on it prominently. Page 1, line 1 of the next manifesto, just as it was in the last one?
Well, I think rather than kind of go down a sort of a route like that, what I'll simply say to you, Martin, is that the arguments for independence will be central to the SNP's election campaign for 2026, and that will run through many of the arguments that I make in the course of the next 12 months, because we're now able to illustrate why Scotland would be better off with independence, because we're seeing firsthand the actions of a Labour government in Westminster following on from a Tory government. And neither of these governments will give us a pathway back into the European Union, which is what's undermining the living standards of people in Scotland. Brexit was a total disaster. It's undermined the living standards of people in Scotland, and independence is the only way that Scotland can overcome those negative impacts on our living standards.
Right. I mean, the polls at the moment suggest, and polls only suggest, we've only got the polls to go on really at the moment, they suggest that you're likely to win that next election, but probably not with a parliamentary majority. You're probably going to have to form a coalition. There may not even be a pro-independence majority in the Parliament. What constitutes a mandate at the next election to go to Keir Starmer and say, right, Indy Ref 2, please, now? Is it just an SNP win? Is it a pro-independence majority? What?
I think the most important thing I can say to you today, Martin, is to acknowledge that there's a long way to go to the election. And I want to make sure the SNP is in a winning position at the next election, because I think Scotland does well when the SNP does well. History tells you all of that. So I want to make sure that we put the arguments to people in Scotland, that we win the largest amount of electoral support we possibly can do, because what history tells us is that Scotland only does well when the SNP does well, and that will be what I invite people to support and to vote for at the election in May of 2026.
Conversely, polling seems to tell us that the SNP does well when you don't talk very much about independence. OK, you're not going to be drawn on what's a mandate. How do you deliver it? Your successors have been given what they've described as thumping mandates in the past. They've gone to Prime Ministers and to Westminster and said, right, we need another referendum, and they've been told to disappear. What makes you think that you can deliver this time round where your predecessors have failed?
Well, what I want to do, Martin, is to bring Scotland together, because Scotland is currently stuck, essentially, because there's an aspiration in Scotland for us to have independence, but and there's a very strong body of opinion that wants independence, but we have not got the means to achieve that because of the stance that's been taken by the United Kingdom government. And what I want to make sure is that I bring people together sufficiently so there's a compelling voice for independence in Scotland, a compelling and demonstrable demonstration of support for independence. Well,
what does that mean?
And that's
60% in the polls? What is a compelling and demonstrable display of support?
Well, if you look at the run-up to the 1997 election in Scotland, when there was demonstrable, clear a consensus of opinion that Scotland should have its own parliament within the United Kingdom. And what I want to make sure is that I lead the debate in Scotland in a way that brings people together to reach that conclusion that independence represents the best way forward for Scotland, and that we should have the right to choose that. Now, that's about political support. It's about creating the conditions that will deliver that type of impetus in the political debate in Scotland, because it is completely unacceptable for the democratic aspirations of a very large number of people in Scotland to be thwarted by a Westminster government that just folds its arms and says no. That's unacceptable. It was unacceptable before 1997, and it's unacceptable now.
Right, let me ask you a bit about an interview that's just taken place on the programme preceding us. Laura Kuenssberg had Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, on and was talking about immigration. The UK government going to announce tomorrow their plans to overhaul the immigration system and make it harder for people to come and work in the UK, certainly to do unskilled jobs. They're talking about time-limiting visas, demanding a better grasp of English, big push on companies to recruit from at home, not look abroad for staff. What do you make of that?
I think the Labour government is really running scared of Farage, and that's what the interview from Yvette Cooper is all about, and what the White Paper will be about tomorrow. There's a positive argument to be made for immigration because it supports economic growth, it supports economic opportunity within our country, and it's all been presented on the terms of Nigel Farage, and the Labour Party is just walking right into that.
You said
so
you wanted to be involved with the
UK.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Swinney. You said you wanted to work with the UK government on migration. Did you have a say in any of this?
No, we didn't, and we've given them our ideas, and on the basis of what I'm hearing from Yvette Cooper this morning, it looks like all of those ideas are going to be thrown aside. So let me just give you one example, Martin. One of the arguments we've put forward, which is it's widely supported in Scotland by the business community, by the university community, and really across the political spectrum, with the voices in all parties, is for students to be able to come to Scotland and then to stay for longer to make an economic contribution. Now, when you look at these issues in the past, some of the greatest inventions and innovations in our economy have come from international students that have come to Scotland, studied, stayed on, started a business and contributed to economic growth. Now, it looks to me, from what I've heard from Yvette Cooper this morning, that door's going to get shut. Now, that is absolute folly. That is going to undermine our economic opportunity, and there's a wide consensus in Scotland that we should have that facility, and Westminster looks as if it's about to say no. Now, that's another argument why Scotland should take our own decisions on questions like migration through independence.
You mentioned Nigel Farage. You've said, here's a quote, for years Mr Farage has been leading the argument which has been hostile to immigration. I think that's based on a fundamentally racist view of the world, and I reject that. You said that just a couple of months ago. Reform UK, Mr Farage's party, are polling about 19% apparently in Scotland at the moment. Do you think the people who say at the moment they would vote for reform are racist?
No, I don't.
Do you think they're far right?
What I think is they're having a... No, I think they're getting a simple solution put in front of them by Nigel Farage, and it appeals to those individuals because they are frustrated with the fact that their standard of living has not improved for a number of years. It's not improved because I think of foolish decisions that have been taken at Westminster about austerity, about Brexit, and about energy prices. And what I'm trying to do is to take the practical steps to improve the cost of living pressures that people are facing. So council tax bills are lower in Scotland, prescription charges are free, water bills are lower in Scotland, most people pay less tax in Scotland compared to the UK, and we've just taken another measure,
so why are
which is to abolish
19% of
peak rail
Scots
fares.
thinking of voting for them? Are they just not thinking hard enough?
No, they're fed up with the lack of progress in their standard of living. And what I've got to try to do is
under your government?
I've got to take the practical step. Well, under my government, we will take the practical steps to reduce their cost of living. So we're doing that on council tax, water bills, prescription charges, tuition fees, peak rail fares and other issues. But then we've also got to make an argument that Westminster isn't working for Scotland because so many of the decisions, for example, on energy prices are taken by the United Kingdom government, and they are creating enormous financial pressure on people in Scotland. And I've got to make that argument to people so they don't opt for a simple solution offered by Nigel Farage, which will be a disaster, but they actually support the Scottish National Party, which has got a sustainable solution, which is good governance in Scotland and the delivery of independence, so we can take the best decisions for Scotland.
Right, listen, just while we've got you, the assisted dying bill being debated and voted upon in Holyrood this coming Tuesday. You have said this past week that you're going to vote against it. I don't want to go through the reasons for that at the moment. We've got Liam MacArthur, who brought the bill, coming on in just a minute. I just want to ask you how difficult a decision it was for you to arrive at.
It's been a really difficult decision, Martin. I found it agonising to listen to the members of my constituency who come to me, my constituents, who've got loved ones that have suffered at the end of their life, and they wanted me to vote for the bill. And I've also listened to various other points of opinion that have said that this will fundamentally change the relationship between patients and clinicians, and also concerns about the impact on the vulnerable within our society who may feel that they may feel they have got to end their life prematurely. I've had to weigh up those arguments. It's been an agonising decision. It's not a decision where any of us can satisfy all of the bodies of opinion that are coming to us with their views. But what I can say is that I think Parliament has gone through this process well. I think Liam MacArthur has constructed a bill carefully. The Health Committee has looked at these issues carefully, and that members of Parliament are agonising about this decision, but I cannot be persuaded that assisted dying is a route that we should open up in Scotland, and I will vote against it on Tuesday.
All right, First Minister, much more on this subject to come in the coming days and in the coming minutes, in fact. But I can hear the bagpipes behind you outside. You're off to a VE Day commemoration church service, so we're going to let you get away to that. Thank you very much indeed for your time, John Swinney. Right, I was asking Mr Swinney there about this sensitive subject of assisted dying, and as I said, this coming Tuesday, MSPs are going to be asked to vote on whether a new law should be introduced in Scotland to allow some terminally ill people to receive help in ending their lives. It's just the first stage of the bill, no final decisions being made this week, but it is a big moment and it is certainly a big question. Perhaps also, hopefully, one of those times when our Parliament's seen at its best, respectful and considerate, as it should be. Liam MacArthur, the Lib Dem MSP, brought the bill forward, and he joins me now, I'm pleased to say. Good morning.
Good morning, Martin.
I'm seeing on the front page of the Herald on Sunday today, you are apparently pretty confident that you've got the numbers to get this through, is that right?
I think I've long felt that the political mood in this Parliament had changed radically from the last time Parliament voted on this back in 2015. I think there's been a mood shift that has brought parliamentarians probably more in line with where the public has been for at least a couple of decades now, where there's been overwhelming support for a change in the law. Many of those colleagues actually come to this issue with their own experience of having lost a family member, a close friend, to a bad death, and I think that's framed this issue for them. But I think there's others who are looking at the changes we're seeing in states and countries around the world, seeing assisted dying laws of the type I'm proposing implemented safely, successfully, that continue to command strong public support and confidence within the medical community that's asked to oversee it and apply that process. And I think drawing confidence from that. I think the vote will be tight, it'll be close on Tuesday, but I think the point that was made there about Parliament at its best, I'm confident that too will come through in the debate. All the discussions I've had with MSP colleagues across the parties over the last probably 4 years of taking forward this bill, those have always been respectful, they've been measured, they've been considered, irrespective of colleagues' views on this issue, and I'm pretty sure that will be borne out by the debate on Tuesday.
Yeah, everybody seems to agree on that. Can you just, briefly if you can, just talk us through how this would work and crucially, who would be eligible for an assisted death?
Yeah, so there are no two assisted dying laws anywhere in the world that are the same, but there is, I suppose, two broad models. A more permissive model we've seen in the Benelux countries, in Netherlands and Belgium, and more recently in Canada. And then a terminal illness mental capacity model that was first introduced in Oregon in the late 1990s, has been rolled out in different states in the US and more recently across the different states in Australia and New Zealand. And my bill very much kind of replicates that. So eligibility would be based on having an advanced progressive terminal illness and the capacity to take the decision. That diagnosis would need to be made by two doctors acting independently. They would also have to make the individual aware of all the treatment choices available to make sure that the decision itself was an informed one. The discussion would have to, I think, get to the rationale for why the request would be made in the first instance. I think recognising there's a need to ensure that no undue pressure or coercion has been brought to bear. There'd be a wait period of 14 days between when the application is made by the patient and any medication being provided. That medication would be provided by a medical professional who would again have to satisfy themselves of capacity and intent, and the medication itself would be self-administered. And it's probably worth also pointing out that there'd be no requirement for this to happen within that, or sorry, straight after those 14 days. I think what we see in other jurisdictions is individuals with an advanced terminal illness going through that process, being found to be eligible, and then using it in a sense as a kind of insurance policy that if things get too much, they know that this option remains available, allowing them to get on with living the rest of their life. And I think again, consistently across those jurisdictions, we see around a third of those that make an application for an assisted death don't ultimately end up using it because they find that the palliative and other care that's been provided to them meets their needs. So, as I say, this is a model that we see working very safely, very successfully, with robust safeguards in place, oversight, data gathering, and reporting taking place. And I'm confident that Scotland can develop a system along those lines that meets our needs and circumstances, but also meets the needs of dying Scots who are being let down and being failed by the current ban on assisted dying here in Scotland.
I'm interested in numbers. I mean, the parameters there are quite broad. An advanced and progressive disease, illness or condition from which they are unable to recover and can reasonably expect it to cause their premature death. I've heard you in the past say that in the first couple of years, you reckon 30-odd people in Scotland might choose to end their lives through this. It will take 20 years to get us up to maybe 400 people. And yet in Canada, 4% of deaths are assisted. Why do you think we would be so different?
Well, I think it's important to draw a distinction, as I said earlier, between the model of assisted dying in place in Canada, which is far more expansive in terms of its eligibility criteria.
But that's the concern, isn't it? It starts like your bill and ends up through the courts and whatever in years to come. Just, you know, it's the thin end of the wedge. It broadens out.
Well, let me address that, but first address that earlier point in relation to the numbers in Canada. The eligibility criteria are far more expansive. It arose as a result not of a parliamentary decision, but a challenge through the Supreme Court under the Canadian Constitution that the ban on assisted dying in Canada was unconstitutional. The court upheld that. The Parliament took forward legislation that didn't go far enough in reflecting the decision of the courts, which was appealed, and Parliament was forced to go further. It's based around suffering as well, which is clearly, I would say, a more subjective concept as opposed to the terminal illness mental capacity model that has been in place, as I say, in Oregon since the late 1990s and now across the States and Australia and New Zealand, and where we have seen no expansion of the eligibility criteria at all. And that was the conclusion reached by the Health Committee of the House of Commons in their report in February last year after an 18-month inquiry into this issue. They found no evidence of an expansion of that eligibility criteria. I think what we see in terms of the numbers, and I do admit this, what I said to the Finance Committee and to the Health Committee when I appeared to give evidence before them late last year and earlier this, coming up with exact figures in the early stages is difficult. It's not often done when legislation is brought forward. But again, looking at what we see from what has happened in those other jurisdictions with a similar model of assisted dying, the numbers do start off relatively low. Partly, I think, a reflection of maybe public awareness, maybe even public confidence in the process, but also in terms of the preparedness of medical professionals to undertake the training to get up and running with the system. I think we see, therefore, the numbers increasing over time. But ultimately, the numbers we see in those jurisdictions with this model of assisted dying is often less than 1% of overall deaths.
Liam MacArthur, plenty more discussion on this over the week. It's debated on Tuesday. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Sunday show this morning. We must leave it there.
Pleasure.
Debate night back on Wednesday night. Join Stephen Jardine then. If you can, join me back here on the telly and the radio. Same time, same place next Sunday. If you're listening on the radio, here's Andrew Black.